Now then, Darren, I hear for a change, immigration's on your mind.
Indeed. Right, so I'm going to take you back to last year to start off with. Last year, England only managed to scrape together 177,000 new homes. Now, let's add a little bit of spice to those numbers, shall we? Because Britain's been on quite the immigration bender and is now suffering one hell of a hangover, with net migration soaring to a record 745,000 in 2022 and 672,000 in 2023. Now, I'm not Carol Vorderman, right? I cannot crunch numbers and I certainly cannot afford the Botox bill. But even I can see that there's a colossal gap between the trickle of housing supply and the tsunami of migrant demand. We've got youngsters in our families eyeing up their first home. Now, they're likely singing hymns of open borders and all that malarkey, but I say it's time for a bloody reality check. Britain wasn't always as open as a Prince Harry memoir. This mass migration business, it's a recent fad. And here's a bit of wisdom for yous. If you're importing a Manchester-sized crowd yearly, well, guess what? You're going to need to start building extra Manchesters every year, right? Consider London, where half of the social housing is filled by those not born on this fair isle. For the comfy crowd, detached from migration's front lines, it's easy to ignore. But what about a single mother hunting for a roof over her kids' heads? Do we just say, well, tough luck, pet, you're queuing behind our diversity drive? Professor Matt Goodwin received quite the kicking this week, and he notes that the Migration Advisory Committee found in 2018 that a 1% rise in population from migration pushes up housing prices by the same margin. And it's not just buying, of course. If the cost of housing goes up, then renting becomes a nightmare too. And it's the young ones who are up against it. The fix, in my eyes, is that we need an immigration freeze. We need more house building, yes, but we also need policies that refuse to send Brits to the back of an ever-growing queue. It shouldn't be controversial to say that. It's common sense. In order to unite Britain, we've got to put a full stop to Britain's mass migration madness. Now, Poppy, you had a really, really good piece for The Telegraph recently. I forget when it was, the other week.
Would have been about a week ago. Yeah.
And it was very good, and I listened to it intently. Now, you, for saying that, by your generation, will have been accused of being some kind of swivel-eyed fruitcake. Are you getting sick of the fact that, you know, we hear people like Benjamin Butterworth talk about how we need to build more housing, whilst at the same time he supports, you know, it's not busloads, it's shiploads coming into this country every year?
Well, I completely agree. The problem with the language around the mass migration debate is it often sees house building and massive immigration as two things that are totally separate from each other. But as you've said, you know, in an ideal world, particularly the world that a lot of very liberal economists will make, well, you know, if we're having 1 million people coming in every year gross, then we can just build 1 million houses. But the problem is in this country, as we know, and I'm sure as you will agree, Benjamin, it's really bloody difficult to build houses. It's very difficult. We have a lot of legislation in place. We have the 1945 Town and County Planning Act, which makes it very, very difficult for the government to actually intervene and do a top-down scheme of building lots of houses. And that's irregardless of the fact that a lot of voters aren't happy to have house building going on near them. So you've got that one aspect. And then you've got the second aspect. And we're told constantly that immigration is good for the economy. It's good for the economy. Don't listen to the fact that productivity's flatlined for the last 15 years. It is good for the economy. We're going to keep saying it until it happens. Well, of course, immigration is going to drive up the cost of housing. I mean, we know that. That's basic supply and demand. And so I think it's very important, particularly for people of my generation, to understand that one of the reasons why you cannot get a foot on the housing ladder, I'm sorry, it's not the nasty Tory government. Well, maybe it is a little bit, but it's not what you think it is. It's not corporate greed. It's immigration. There is a relationship between these two things. And until we can have an honest conversation about what that relationship entails for my generation, well, then, you know, we're just going to talk ourselves in circles.
Benjamin?
I mean, when you've got 750,000 people, as it was estimated last year, I think it would be intellectually redundant to say that that's not going to have an effect. Now, many of those people actually tend to live in not great conditions, frankly, and have many people in one home. So I suspect it's not quite so dramatic as you might fear. But the truth is, the fundamental issue here is that we've built half as many homes in the last 40 years as France has. So we have an issue here that goes back before the kind of immigration levels that we have, and that has been brewing for about 30 years as a problem. And at the same time, you've seen the number of people buying second and third homes, not necessarily to rent, but as, places to go on holiday in the UK, that has gone up 800% in the last 10 years. And so when you talk about housing crisis, you can't pretend that's not there. 15% of all houses in this country are rented. That's an enormous proportion, and that's people buying up lots of houses. When you're talking about supply and demand, that is having a profound effect on the cost. And full disclosure, my grandparents were buy-to-let landlords, so, that affects the economy. But now so many people do it that is causing a problem. We're 4 million homes short. And the fact is, I think there are a lot of people that would like to say that it's, the immigrants, full stop, that are causing this, who also sit there going to the local council meetings complaining about their view of the park or the golf course when they don't want new houses built. Lots of people in this country live in entire cities and towns that were built in the 50s, the 60s, and have nice lives there, that also go on and oppose anything remotely like that being built today.
But
That's
even if people like your grandparents, for example, had said, look, I'll let you build 4 million homes, let's have them all near me, right? We've got a crisis here, let's do it. Next year, we're going to have another 700,000 people come here, and then we'll be back to square one because of the kind of policies that you Liberals support.
But isn't it good now that we're at least admitting that there is a relationship between the two, right?
Oh, that took us long enough. I mean,
but this
not
is
rocket
really
science.
This is what the conversation comes down to. It's about there is a relationship between the two. You don't live in an ideal world where you can have one or the other. You've got to address both. I agree. Let's liberalise house building, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that we can deal with the backlog.
I think when we talk
can't
about
be adding more.
When we talk about immigration and housing, look, of course, I agree with Benjamin and Darren in that, of course, if we're going to be having 750,000 people coming into a year, that's going to have an impact on housing demand. But even if we had an immigration freeze tomorrow, Darren, which I don't agree with, but let's say we had an immigration freeze tomorrow, there would still be a housing crisis in this country. So let's not pretend that just an immigration freeze alone is going to solve the housing crisis in this country. It is not. And actually, it is also true that if we are going to build the numbers of houses that we need in this country in the time that we want them all built, 500,000 a year, we might actually need some migrant labour for a limited time to come over and build those houses. So I think an immigration freeze would be bonkers, by the way. I think immigration should come down, because I think 750,000 in 1 year is bonkers. But a total immigration freeze would be bonkers, because there are skills that we need in this country that we don't have in the native population.
Which is that a lot of investment in house building, especially in a city like London, comes from businesses in the Arab world, and a lot of the people building houses in this country come from Eastern Europe. So the idea that there's not two sides of this which involve immigration would be ridiculous.
I don't want our green and pleasant land to be concreted over because of immigration. No, but I'm just saying, if it continues, the idea that, we'll just build more and more houses. We're not talking about mini Oxfords and beautiful Bath Crescents that are going to be built up and down the country. That's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but I think that the idea of immigration now has completely been stolen from us via the ballot box. It's like we can't vote on it anymore. It's been taken away from us. And I don't think it's the immigrants' fault at all. I mean, they have been welcomed and encouraged to come here by the government. So anyone who has frustration over housing, direct your anger at the government, not about those coming into your community where housing's concerned, because they've been encouraged to come here. And it's been reckless of the government to encourage so many to come here when we do not have the infrastructure to house our own, especially in council housing. It's a betrayal of the British people.
At all.
No, but it's not about having none at all. I think we should have a pause on the numbers down to tens of thousands. I want to build some houses for those people already here, not for people coming abroad. No.
Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk, and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.